You're watching F1 2022 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco. There were no lack of controversies and rules rows during the 2022 Formula 1 season, but there was a significant and very late regulation change that is largely forgotten, and that's despite it having a big impact on how the season played out. So big, in fact, that it's even been described as a let-off that helped some teams solve a self-inflicted problem. So exactly what was this change? Why was it divisive among the teams? And was it fair to change the rules? If you cast your mind back to pre-season testing, the ride of the cars was the big talking point, with all manner of porpoising and bouncing blighting teams to a greater or lesser extent. Discussion quickly turned to how to solve these problems. Connected to this was the fact that the cars were running very low to the ground and floors were prone to impacts, both on the track surface and on curbs. Partly, this was down to how much the floors flex when exposed to the fluctuating aero loads and the bouncing of the cars. When the latest edition of the regulations was released on the eve of the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix, much of the talk was about the small increase in minimum weight from 795 to 798 kilos. But arguably the more significant change was contained in the new paragraph C, which was added to Article 3.5.7 of the technical regulations. This new rule permitted a single stay to be added on each side of the car to support the floor bodywork. Effectively, it was a metal strip that helped to hold the floor in place by taking a tension load, which some had experimented with in testing. The majority of teams supported this measure. For the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix, 6 teams ran such a stay: Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo and Haas. A week later, for the second event of the season in Saudi Arabia, Williams and Aston Martin had also joined the club. But not everyone was happy with the change. The Alpine A522 didn't suffer from major porpoising or bouncing problems early in the year. This was down to taking a deliberately cautious approach with its design concept. This approach was rooted in concerns detected in CFD that indicated potential instability in airflow structures should the floor flex. Obviously, if the floor is flapping about, it will cause disruption to the airflow. These worries led to what Chief Technical Officer Pat Fry called a cautious approach. That meant the team produced a robust, stiff and therefore slightly heavy floor, as well as committing to a wide sidepod concept that also mitigated the risk of the floor flexing. Then the floor stay was introduced, and that annoyed Fry. Alpine didn't need the floor stays because its floor was stiff enough thanks to the extra weight. That meant it didn't run the stays in the first 3 events of the season. It did, however, take an if you can't beat 'em, join 'em approach by introducing a lighter floor for weight saving for race 4 at Imola, adding stays to stabilise it. But many of its rivals needed the floor stays and were therefore able to avoid making other changes that might have compromised their performance, such as adding weight to make a more robust floor or running at higher, downforce sapping ride heights. So Alpine might well have had a stronger start to the season had the floor stays not been adopted. The race asked Fry if that would have been the case, to which he said he would have thought so. He added that it would have been easy for other teams to fix the problem if they had been willing to sacrifice performance. Ultimately, it didn't make that big a difference to Alpine, given it was unlikely to finish higher than 4th in the Constructors' Championship, which is where it ended up. But it does raise a fascinating philosophical question of whether it's right to make a change to the rules just before the season to help out teams who have messed up. And could Alpine have got some big results early in the year if the rule change hadn't helped rival teams? Progress is a race that has no end. After every finish line, another challenge awaits. How can Aramco continue to push innovation in a sport at the forefront of technology? This is how. Discover how Aramco and the Aston Martin Formula 1 team aim to meet Formula 1's sustainable fuel targets. Aramco, powered by How. Alpine's position is completely understandable. It recognised the risks and took major design decisions based on avoiding the problems caused by floor flexibility. While others fell into that trap, having been more aggressive in pursuit of additional performance, they were able to lobby for changes and get a rules break. But the reason it didn't prove especially controversial was that most teams were in agreement. So while it was unfair on Alpine, given the short turnaround between pre-season testing and the early races of the season, it's no surprise the FIA felt it was pragmatic to allow the stays. After all, it wouldn't have been good for F1 or the fans watching had the early races been a debacle with teams struggling to unleash the full pace of their cars. Some would have struggled more in the early races without the stays, and the amount of floor damage would have been immense. Hence, even Alpine didn't, publicly at least, kick up too much of a fuss at the time. However, sometimes you just have to take the hit for the good of the sport. But the impact on the relative competitiveness of teams was real. That's not only in terms of those who were struggling with the flaws getting a quick and easy fix, but also the fact that teams didn't have to then invest resources in making their designs more robust. That's design and development time that could then be focused on performance. One possible consequence had the floor stays not been permitted is that Red Bull, which also ran at the start of the season without floor stays, might have had an even stronger start to the year. In Alpine's case, it might have cost a few bigger results, particularly early on in the season. So you can see why there's disappointment that decisions it got right and others got wrong didn't really pay off thanks to the decision to permit floor stays. Philosophical, it was wrong to make the change, given Alpine had got it right based on how the regulations were written. But in the real world, sometimes pragmatism rules, and you can understand why. Thanks for watching F1 2022 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco.